Hey, y'all, welcome to Oh My Word with Katie. I know that at some point this summer, Christopher Nolan's adaptation of The Odyssey is coming out. This intro is not about The Odyssey. I need to reread that story before I ever try to talk about it on a podcast because I'm pretty sure I slept through the mythology unit in junior high English. But what I do want to talk to you about is another Christopher Nolan movie, The Dark Knight Rises, and why you should watch it and how the gospel shows up in it. If you have not seen the Dark Knight trilogy, which, yes, I own in its entirety, you should definitely watch it. But the third and final installment of that trilogy, The Dark Knight Rises, the gospel shows up in a bunch of different ways. Now, I don't know if Christopher Nolan is a Christian, but first of all, there are at least two resurrections, I put that in air quotes, of the hero, Batman. So, resurrection number one, he is thrown into the pit, the underground prison, wherever that is. I don't even remember where it is. And, basically left for dead. Everybody thinks he's dead. And then he manages to get out of said prison. And so he's essentially back from the dead. That's resurrection number one. Resurrection number two happens at the very end when he has to use the bat pod or airplane or whatever it is he calls that vehicle and carry the bomb outside the city and drop the bomb into the ocean. And he's told Morgan Freeman, oh, there's no autopilot. So everybody thinks that he's going to die when the bomb goes off. But in reality, he has fixed the autopilot so that he can eject out of the plane before the bomb goes off. So he survives, and you find that out at the very end. And so that's sort of another resurrection. So you have that. But to me, the even more compelling gospel storyline in this movie is Catwoman, played by Anne Hathaway, who is great in this role. Sometimes she's a little ham-fisted. I don't know if that's the right word. On the nose, over the top, something like that. She's not subtle. But I love her character in this, and I love her character arc. She starts off, as you may know, as a jewel thief, very bitter, jaded, cynical. She steals a set of pearls from Bruce Wayne from his mansion. And then later, she has kind of teamed up with Batman, but ends up leading Batman to Bane, the villain who has set a trap for him. So she leads Batman into a trap to the villain named Bane, whose name literally means death, I'm pretty sure. Okay. So she leads him to what she thinks is going to be his death. And that's when Bane throws him into the pit, into the prison, and then he comes back. So he's essentially resurrected. And when he comes back as Bruce Wayne, and she knows that Bruce is Batman now, he comes to her and he offers her a second chance. Even though she's stolen from him, even though she betrayed him to death, he gives her another chance. And he offers her this piece of technology that will essentially erase her criminal record. All right, are you listening to the parallels here? The piece of technology is literally called the clean slate. Okay. He offers this to her and asks her to partner with him again to help save the city from Bane. Okay, so follow me, partner with me, save your people from death. If you choose to follow me, I'm going to give you this clean slate. Who does that sound like, y'all? Hello. And I know it sounds a little on the nose, it sounds cheesy, but Christopher Nolan does not make cheesy movies, okay? Just believe me if you have not seen this movie. It's incredible. And I probably have spoiled some of it for you, but it is so worth watching either way. Watch them in order. Everybody says The Dark Knight, like the second movie, The Dark Knight, is the best film. But as far as the gospel imagery in these movies, The Dark Knight rises to the top, I guess you could say. But anyway, just another example of God showing up in words and stories. Love those movies. Love Christopher Nolan. Very excited to see The Odyssey, which is not a Christian story at all, but I'll be very interested to see what he does with it. So anyway, without any further ado, I hope you enjoy the rest of today's episode. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Oh My Word with Katie, the show where we hear from Christian writers, give you amazing book recommendations, and marvel at all the ways God shows up in words and stories. I'm your host, Katie Gann, and today I'm excited to be interviewing Alan Noble, or should I say Dr. Alan Noble, PhD. Alan is the author of On Getting Out of Bed, You Are Not Your Own, and Disruptive Witness, as well as his latest book, which is called to live well, practical wisdom for moving through chaotic times. And Alan, I was just saying before we started recording, this book has hit my life at the right moment. And so if there's ever a bad moment to have practical wisdom, but I'm very excited that you've written this, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So you've written basically in this book one chapter based on each of seven virtues and how we can sort of live those out in light of the gospel. What inspired you to write this? Because, based on your other book titles, it seems like they're kind of about living well too, but this
Yeah.
kind of hones in on some things. So what made you want to write this book specifically?
So there are two big things that happened. One was when I wrote You Are Not Your Own, I wrote a book about making this argument that we live in a culture that is not designed as God created us. It's designed with this assumption that we belong to ourselves, and that's not true about us. We belong to God, as Paul says. And so because society keeps telling us that we belong to ourselves, we have these burdens of self-responsibility that are put on our shoulders that just weigh us down and stress us out and give us anxiety and depression and all kinds of problems, civic problems and interpersonal problems and all these things. And so when I went around the country talking about these problems and talking about this society that's not built for us, and I talked about the solution, which is recognizing that we belong to God. A lot of people asked me in Q&As, well, what are we supposed to do? What are the boots on the ground, practical application solutions to this? And so my answer to them was, well, you need to recognize that you belong to God. And they said, that's great, but what am I supposed to do with my cell phone? What am I supposed to do with my kids? What am I supposed to do with my day-to-day life? And I thought, well, that's a legitimate question, and I don't have an answer for you right now. And I thought that deserves a book of its own. And so this book comes out of that. It's an attempt to answer that question. And so the temperance chapter, for example, deals with cell phones and how to deal with smartphones and technology and use the virtue of temperance to deal with that question. Yeah. So it comes in part out of that. The other thing that it inspired it was working with college students. I work with a lot of college students in my day job at Oklahoma Baptist University, and many of them come to me for, as they come to lots of professors, for advice and counsel and mentorship and discipleship. And I see just a real hunger in this generation for mentorship. A desire for guidance through life. There's a lot of confusion about what it means to move through this world. They're getting a lot of conflicting messages about what justice is. They're getting a lot of conflicting messages about what love is. They're getting a lot of conflicting messages about how to find careers, how to find a spouse, whether to find a spouse, whether to focus just on their careers, all these sorts of things. And they're confused and they're hungry to do the right thing, but they lack a lot of mentorship. And so part of this book comes out of a desire to offer that kind of wise, practical counsel for people, not just younger people, but for anyone who feels, as the subtitle says, struggling in a chaotic world. So those were the sort of sources of this book.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, explain how you chose the particular virtues you chose, and then we're going to circle back to some of this.
So I chose the particular virtues I chose because the first four that I deal with, prudence, justice, fortitude, or courage, otherwise known as courage, and temperance, are what are considered the four cardinal virtues. And Thomas Aquinas thought of these as the cardinal virtues. St. Augustus thought of these as the cardinal virtues. Traditionally, in the classical world, these were the core virtues that in the Roman world and in the Christian church, these were thought of as these four cardinal virtues that all other virtues that you could think of came back down to.
Mm.
And then there are three other virtues that are thought of as the theological virtues: faith, hope, and love, that Paul talks about, that are actually deeper and more meaningful virtues, especially love as the
Mm.
foundational virtue, that tie together these cardinal virtues. And so I used those virtues as important as the building blocks of what I do
Mhm.
in the book.
Okay. So this is a big topic.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
it is.
we don't belong to ourselves, we belong to God, but then how do we live that out day to day? Here's seven virtues. I mean, each of the seven could be its own book. How did you keep from just like, I don't know, how did you make that even doable for yourself as a writer?
It was not easy. It was not easy. What I decided to do to frame this, to make this organization make sense to me, was I began each chapter with a small discussion of why this virtue, why each particular virtue is difficult to practice in the contemporary world, because I
Mhm.
think that each virtue is difficult to practice. So, temperance, for example, is difficult to practice in a world that says you have to say, or you should say, yes to whatever you desire. So,
Mhm.
temperance is difficult for us to practice. And then I move to a definition of that virtue, and I start in that definition section with a model of Jesus. How does
Mm.
Jesus model that virtue? So I ground it in the Gospels. And then I give a philosophical definition using usually, particularly, a virtue philosopher, a Thomas Aquinas philosopher named Joseph Pieper, a Catholic philosopher, and he gives us some really good definitions. And I also pull from some other sources to give us some definitions of what these different virtues mean, and spend some time talking about what do these virtues look like? What are the
Mhm.
nuances of these virtues? How are they, what do they feel like? What do they look like? What are the ins and outs of these virtues? And then
Mhm.
I have a long section with at least two practical applications of each virtue,
Yeah.
because I want people to know, what do these virtues look like lived.
Mhm.
But you're right, each virtue could be a book, and people have written books on each virtues.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and speaking of, and I'm glad you said his name before I did, Josef Pieper, because that is
yeah,
not what I was gonna say.
yeah,
Your introduction mentions him, and you use his thoughts, his writings throughout the book, but you mention in the introduction, like, "Hey, this guy's not perfect."
yeah,
He, to quote you, he said, "He himself failed to live up to the highest standards of justice and fortitude." Specifically, his opposition to the Nazis was not as clear, pronounced, and forceful as it could have been. So this is a World War II era guy. I mean, this is like my worst fear. Like, I'm so afraid that I'm going to wake up one day and be on the wrong side of history and realize, oh,
yeah.
shoot, I should have been speaking out against this, and this, and I haven't done it. And now everybody knows, and I'm humiliated, and I feel like a horrible person. Like, how do we balance, like, examining ourselves rightly for any of these virtues versus just like living in constant fear over, oh no, that may be a bigger question than the book, but that's just something that stood out to me.
No, no, it's a good question. And so what he says, what he acknowledges at the beginning of one of his, so I pull from two books that he wrote on the virtues. And one of the things he says at the beginning, the introduction to one of his books on the virtues, is that no one practices the virtues perfectly.
Hmm.
Um, this is just a reality. This is just a reality that we live with as fallen human beings. None of us are going to do this perfectly. We
Hmm.
are going to fail. The the point is not to achieve perfection. As humans, we're not going to do that. Um, the point is to glorify God and to pursue Christ likeness,
Yeah.
and to do that out of love because of what Christ has already done for us.
Hmm.
That's the goal. So, because of what Christ has already done for us, because we are already righteous because of Christ's imputed righteousness, we desire to
Yeah.
We desire to act righteously. We desire to act virtuously. And we're not going to do it perfectly. We're not going to, and we're not going to get everything right. And that's okay. There's grace for that. And
Mhm.
we accept that grace. And to answer your question about, you know, the question about, what if I end up on the wrong side and I haven't spoken out enough on this, or I haven't spoken enough on that. I love, I quote this on Getting Out of Bed. I think, if not, I meant to. I might paraphrase it
Yeah.
or allude to it. But there's this passage in True Spirituality by Francis Schaeffer where he talks about, that's meant a lot to me, um, where he talks about sin that we're not sure if it's real guilt or false guilt.
Mhm.
And he says that when we have this feeling of guilt inside of us, our responsibility is to respond to what we know on the surface. So, what we know on the surface is true guilt. So, if we
Mhm.
have a real sin, so in this case, if we have a real acknowledgement, gosh, you know what? I am responsible for speaking out on this issue, or for doing something on this issue, because this is in my sphere of influence. I'm responsible. So this would be in the justice chapter.
Mhm.
This is my responsibility to do something. Then we're responsible for doing that. But if we just have guilt feelings and that's it,
Mhm.
then we need to go to the Holy Spirit and say, God, if there's something here, bring that to the surface.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to agonize and delve into my spirit and spend
Yeah.
time ruminating about this, because this is not on the surface.
Yeah.
And I trust that because you love me, you would bring this to the surface
Yeah.
if there was something there. And to me, that's been a great comfort, because um, I've had similar doubts. So
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. So that's really great. Like, this book is not designed to get us all to question our own temperance and fortitude and all these things. It's just to give us the tools to, you know, move forward in those areas. Was there, either as you're writing this or just in general, is there one particular of the virtues that you struggle with more? And did writing the book help you?
that's a good question. I have not thought about that. I would say, I think I think temperance is hard for everyone in the contemporary world. Um, and courage, and courage. Um, um, Temperance with regard to social media use and things like that. But then courage in regard to just mental health challenges and things of that nature, and just struggles in life, and just recognizing that, as I write about in the book, you know, life itself involves a lot of suffering.
Mhm.
And to respond to that suffering requires a great deal of fortitude or courage,
Yeah.
because that's how we endure.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a practice that we have to develop.
Mhm. Mhm. Was there, as you wrote the book, how did God show up in ways that may have surprised you?
I think for me, what was surprising was that in learning about the virtues, I felt the virtues encouraged cultivated in my own life. I felt like the more I understood the virtues, the more I wanted to practice them, the
Mhm.
more I wanted to live them out, the more I felt convinced that they mattered in my life. And
Mhm.
it wasn't just that head knowledge, it was like head knowledge clarified things that I already knew in shadows, but they filled it out and made it clear to me that I needed to invest in these things. So in
Mhm.
moments of crisis, for example, to go back to courage, I could use the language of courage and say to myself, Alan, you need to be courageous right now, or you need to have fortitude. You need to endure this suffering
Mhm.
because that is the right thing to do for the greater good, for the good of your family, for the good of God, for the good of whatever this situation might be.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that's how God showed up. And practicing these virtues, uh, it's not just that you're practicing these virtues just for the sake of being a better person, right? So
Yeah.
when we talk about practicing these virtues, it's not just, I'm doing this to be a moral person. The point of practicing these virtues is to glorify God,
Amen.
right? Is to glorify God. So that's really important to note, right? So I'm
Mhm.
not saying this is a book of 7 things you practice to be the best version of Alan, right? So
Mhm.
this isn't a self-help book, right? This is, how do you glorify God with your life
Mhm.
through these 7 practices?
Yeah, and speaking of that, you mentioned this word also in your introduction called telos,
Hmm.
Telos. What does that mean, and how does that tie into this idea of glorifying God?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this idea of telos has everything to do with what this book is about. So telos is the idea of ultimate purpose or direction towards which we are moving and are designed for. So everyone was created with a telos, with a
Mhm.
direction towards which we were moving. We were created with a telos. We were created to glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's
Mhm.
our telos. So um, what that means is that has implications in how we live our life. We can ignore that telos and live in rebellion to it, or we can conform ourselves to that telos and recognize that is what I was created for.
Mhm.
And we can start practicing living toward that telos. And that looks like living a virtuous life in part. It means lots of other things. It
Mhm.
means like acknowledging that you belong to God, first of all, and living for him and recognizing his son's sacrifice on the cross. But it also means living a virtuous life. It means
Mhm.
living a life where you love your neighbor as yourself. It means a life of faith. It means a life of hope. It means a life of justice. It means a life of prudence. And all of those things aren't just defined in worldly terms. They're defined by your telos, what
Mhm.
you were created to be. So there are secular accounts of virtues, but those secular accounts of virtues could have justice defined in secular terms. And what
Right.
I want to do is I'm grounding these things in what God created us to be, what our telos is.
Mhm.
So most of these virtues, or really all of these virtues, they have to do with the definition of what the good is, what the
Mhm.
good is. And the good is God's glory. And
Yeah.
that's our telos. That's what we were created for, is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So the telos is really everything.
Mhm. That's so good. So, most of the time on this show, most of the authors I interview are fiction writers.
Okay.
So this episode is a little different.
Yeah.
But I did recently interview Karen Swallow Prior, who wrote a book. I don't know if it was these exact same 7 virtues, but it's called On Reading Well. And each chapter, she talked about a classic work of literature and what it can
Yeah.
teach us about one of these virtues. So, my question for you is there a classic fiction or nonfiction that you would recommend maybe for people to read alongside your book or after they read your book? And how do you see God or the virtues show up in that classic?
Yeah, so the one that immediately comes to mind is the Divine Comedy, Dante's The Divine Comedy. You get there Dante's understanding of Thomas Aquinas's accounts of the virtues throughout, in his understanding of sin, in his understanding of virtue, of vice, and in virtue, in the opposite in virtue. So and that's probably the best account I would say of virtue in classical
Mhm.
literature is Dante's Inferno. It's a dense read, it's a
Yeah,
long read, but
yeah.
it's beautiful. It's one of the greatest works in literature, and so it's a powerful read, and it points us to this vision of God,
Mhm.
um, and it um, um, Dante understood the idea of a telos, right? Dante
Mhm.
understood that we were created for God and
Mhm.
directed toward God, right? And so that's one of the other things that I love about this great work is that he's writing in such a way that his character, which is named Dante, is moving toward God because that's what he was created for. And so
Mhm.
that's exactly what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, yeah. So I believe, and I know I'm sure you do, and a lot of other people do, that stories can impact the way we live. Like if we read Dante's Inferno, or we read the Book of Ruth, or we read, even a classic work of literature that can impact the way we live. So then does that mean how do we treat popular fiction, or the book we pick up at the airport, or books that aren't necessarily super deep or even Christian in category? Like, should we never read those, or how do you personally feel about those?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, and this is kind of what I teach my students, I think we have to have uh, two lenses on when we read. One lens is humility before the author. And so humility before the author means that we allow the author to make their case, make their paint their world, invite us into their world, and describe its depth and its beauty so that we don't hold our biases up front and prevent them from allowing us to see the beauty of this world. Um, um, and so that's the first lens is we just or the first lens is humility before the author. We
Mhm.
humble ourselves and we allow it. The second lens is a kind of critical distance. And that critical distance is a distance of discernment, of biblical discernment. We can never let go of that biblical discernment. We can never let go and just say, whatever the author gives me, I'm going to allow into my soul as
Mhm.
good. And actually, in Dante's Inferno, we have an example of this. Two
Mhm.
characters, Paolo and Francesca, read a story of Lancelot, and they become infatuated with each other because they read Lancelot, and they read it too lustily, and they have an affair because they're reading Lancelot alone, and he has an affair, and they're like, why don't we just have an affair?
Yeah.
And Dante's point is that literature read poorly, read in the wrong setting, read with the wrong mindset, can become dangerous.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's true. I think that even good literature read with the wrong mindset, without a discerning spirit, without a discerning mind, without that critical lens, can become bad for you. One of
Mhm.
my favorite novels is The Catcher in the Rye. If
Mhm.
you read that novel badly, it can be bad for your soul.
Yeah.
And a lot of people read that novel badly
Mhm.
and either hate it, which makes me sad, or it's bad for their soul, which also makes me sad.
Yeah.
It's very few people who read it and love it and understand what's going on.
Mhm.
And that makes me sound elitist, but I think that's the truth. Is that
Yeah.
it's very few who actually get out of it what needs to be got out of it. And
Mhm.
so, and there are lots of books like that. The Great Gatsby can be read poorly, and you can get the wrong things out of it. So, I think, to answer your question, I think we need to have both of those lenses. We need to have
Mhm.
this humility, but we need to keep that critical lens so that when we're reading popular fiction, when we're reading, just sort of fun things, when we're reading non-Christian literature, we're never letting go of the biblical discernment that we're called to,
Mhm.
so that our soul is kept safe.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Speaking more of books, do you have well, okay, you mentioned Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah,
Do you have a favorite book outside of your own genre? So I guess your genre is biblical nonfiction, so to speak.
yeah.
What would be your favorite book outside of that?
Yeah, so my favorite book is an incredibly violent novel called Blood Meridian, which I do not recommend, because it is extremely violent and graphic. But it is probably, in my opinion, it's one of the best works of 20th century American literature, which is my field. By Cormac McCarthy. It's about a bunch of scalp hunters in Mexico after the Civil War. And it's about good and evil and the possibility of overcoming evil.
Mm,
And it's profound and it's beautifully written, but it's very difficult to get through.
mm.
Um, uh, so a lighter read by Cormac McCarthy would be The Road. That would be
That's on my list. Yeah.
yeah, that's a safer read. It's also difficult, but I mean, um, not reading wise, but just
Yeah.
emotionally wise.
Yeah.
But it's
Well, I
great.
mean, didn't he write No Country for Old Men?
Yeah,
Yeah. So you're not going to get it's not going to be breezy
no, it's
if
not
you read.
breezy. No, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What are you reading right now, and how do you see God show up in that story?
So I'm reading The Power and the Glory. It's for class. I'm teaching it, but I'm reading The Power and the Glory by Graham Greene, which
Mhm.
is about a whiskey priest in Mexico during the persecution of the anti-clerical period in Mexico, where priests were hunted and shot for. Catholic priests were hunted and shot for their beliefs in the province of Tabasco. And he's going around and administering the sacraments, Catholic sacraments. And it's a fascinating novel. And I'm just seeing God in the way the character, even though I'm not Catholic, I'm Presbyterian, but I'm just seeing God in the way he's the main character is remaining faithful despite his persecution.
Yeah.
It's a one of Graham Greene's best novels. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah,
And you said whiskey priest?
yeah. He's not a good person.
Okay.
He's an alcoholic, and
Okay.
he has a child. He has a child on the side, and he's an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And he wants to get caught and shot because he wants to stop running, but the duty to his parishioners keeps him going.
Wow.
So that's the tension that the novel is on. Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds really good.
it
Okay.
is really good. Yeah,
I've been interested in reading Graham Greene, but wasn't sure where to start. That might be it.
I would start with The End of the Affair, which I
Okay.
think is a better novel, but
Okay.
The Power and the Glory is really good too.
Yeah. All right. Tell us when and where people can buy your book.
Yeah, so To Live Well will be out April 28th, wherever good, bad, and mediocre books are sold. Amazon, etc., Hearts and Minds Books, Barnes and Noble should sell it, everywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, pick it up, please.
And it is Alan, Alan. If y'all are listening to this and you don't see Alan's name at the bottom of his screen, that's how you spell so
Yeah.
Alan Noble. All right. Finally, is there a Bible verse or a scripture that you'd like to end with that maybe relates to the book?
Yeah, I'm thinking Ephesians 2:10, for we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So often when we think about our faith, I think we're so easily discouraged about our faith and what we can do and our ability to do, to live virtuously.
Mhm.
But that verse in Ephesians says that we're God's craftsmanship and we're actually created for good works. And I love that it's not that we're doing these good works. It's not that we made up these good works. God made up the good works. We're
Mhm.
just walking in them. We're just doing, we're just, it's like God put the footsteps and we're just like stepping in them.
Mhm.
Um, but we do need to step in them. And so that's my encouragement to people. That's what this book is about, is that, we're called to do these things. And so let's just live in it.
Yeah. That's so good. Alan, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Yeah.
And y'all, if you enjoyed this episode of Oh My Word with Katie, please share it with your friends. Please give us both a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts because that helps us reach more people. And also, if you like the show, you might enjoy Mississippi Christian Living Magazine, which is my day job. And you can find that at mschristianliving.com. And until next time, I'll talk to y'all soon.